The first time the billionaire's son screamed, 5 private doctors rushed into the room. By the time the 7th specialist tried, he had already shattered a $40,000 glass sculpture and locked himself inside a panic so deep, even his own mother couldn't reach him. Money had built empires for Cassandra Vale. It had bought influence, power, and a reputation that made world leaders return her calls within minutes. But it couldn't buy one simple thing: her son's trust. 8-year-old Ethan Vale lived inside a world no one else could enter. A world where bright lights felt like explosions. Where voices sounded like thunder crashing too close to his ears. Where even a gentle touch could feel like danger. The best therapists in the country had tried. Award-winning neurologists had studied him. Elite behavioral specialists had written reports thick enough to fill shelves. Every single one of them failed. Until the day a single mother walked into the Vale estate carrying nothing but a catering tray, and a past she was still trying to outrun. She wasn't famous. She wasn't rich. And she definitely wasn't someone Cassandra Vale would have trusted with her son. But within minutes of meeting Ethan, she did something no expert had ever managed to do. She made him stop screaming. And what happened after that moment would shatter reputations, expose secrets buried inside one of the most powerful families in America, and force a mother to confront a truth she had spent years avoiding. Because sometimes, the person who changes everything is the one nobody was supposed to notice. Welcome to the channel, where we uncover extraordinary stories hidden inside ordinary moments, stories about resilience, unexpected heroes, and the quiet battles people fight behind closed doors. And this story might change the way you see strength forever. Cassandra Vale's mansion stood on a private cliff overlooking the Atlantic, surrounded by iron gates and security cameras that tracked every movement within 100 yards. The estate was a symbol of power, wealth, and absolute control, everything Cassandra had spent 2 decades building. Inside, however, control was the one thing she never truly had. The morning began the way most mornings did, with silence that never lasted long enough. "Mrs. Vale, he hasn't slept again," the night nurse whispered as Cassandra stepped into the hallway, already dressed in a tailored navy suit, her tablet filled with board meeting notes and international investment updates. Cassandra didn't stop walking. "How long this time?" 3 hours. He started pacing again around midnight. She paused outside a reinforced bedroom door, her reflection staring back at her from the polished metal surface. Behind that door was the only thing in her life she couldn't negotiate with, couldn't strategize around, couldn't fix with money. Her son. 8-year-old Ethan Vale. From inside the room, a rhythmic tapping echoed against the walls. Cassandra slowly opened the door. Ethan sat in the corner, knees pulled to his chest, rocking gently back and forth. The blackout curtains were drawn tight, blocking every hint of sunlight. Rows of expensive sensory equipment lined the walls, weighted blankets, therapy swings, custom-designed calming lights. None of it worked anymore. "Good morning, sweetheart," Cassandra said carefully, maintaining the exact tone specialists had coached her to use. Ethan didn't look up. He continued tapping the floor, tap, 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 faster now, like his thoughts were racing ahead of him. The therapist standing nearby scribbled notes. "He's regressing again," she said quietly. Cassandra's jaw tightened. "What changed?" "We believe increased exposure to public events might be overwhelming him. His nervous system appears." "I didn't ask for theory," Cassandra interrupted sharply. "I asked for solutions." The therapist lowered her eyes. She had no nuances. Cassandra turned away, her heels clicking sharply against the marble hallway as she walked toward her home office. Within seconds, she was back on a video conference, discussing a billion-dollar acquisition with investors across 3 continents. Her voice was steady, confident, untouchable. But behind the camera, her fingers trembled slightly against her desk. Meanwhile, 30 miles away in a cramped apartment above a laundromat, Mariah Bennett balanced 2 jobs, 3 overdue bills, and a daughter who believed her mother could solve anything. "Mom, you're gonna be late again," 6-year-old Lila said, swinging her legs from the kitchen counter. Mariah smiled while tying her hair into a tight bun, exhaustion hidden beneath practiced warmth. "Late is just early somewhere else, baby." Lila giggled, satisfied with the answer. Mariah grabbed her catering uniform from a chair, smoothing the wrinkles with her hands. The company had assigned her a high-profile event that afternoon. She didn't know the client's name yet, only that it paid double her usual rate. And right now, double meant survival. "You gonna pick me up after school?" Lila asked. "Always." Mariah kissed her daughter's forehead, lingering just a second longer than usual. Because promises mattered when it felt like the world was constantly trying to break them. By noon, Mariah arrived at the Vale estate, staring through the towering gates as security scanned her ID twice before allowing her inside. The mansion rose in front of her like something out of another universe. Inside, staff moved with rehearsed precision. Crystal glasses sparkled under chandelier light. Caterers arranged silver trays with military discipline. Mariah kept her head down, focusing on her job. Stay invisible. Stay professional. Leave no impression. That was the rule for people like her. Then a sudden crash shattered the calm. Glass exploded somewhere deep inside the house. Followed by a scream. Not a tantrum. Not a child being difficult. It was raw, primal, terrified. Mariah froze mid-step. And without realizing it, she turned toward the sound. Security rushed past her first. Then nurses. Then two sharply dressed specialists carrying emergency calming kits. Mariah should have stayed where she was. Every instinct from years of working high-end events told her the same thing. Staff never interferes with family matters. But the scream came again. Louder this time. And something inside her chest tightened with recognition. She followed the sound down a long marble hallway until she reached a wide living area where chaos unfolded like a scene from a disaster movie. Expensive artwork hung crooked on the walls. A shattered sculpture lay scattered across the floor like fallen diamonds. In the center of the room, Ethan Vale thrashed against two caregivers trying to restrain him. His breathing came in sharp, panicked bursts. His hands clawed at the air like he was fighting something invisible. "Hold him steady," one specialist shouted. "Dim the lights. Dim the lights." Another nurse reached for his arm. Ethan screamed again, louder, sharper, his entire body jerking violently as if every touch burned. Mariah stopped at the doorway, her heart pounding. She had seen this before. Not in mansions. Not surrounded by million-dollar furniture. But in hospital waiting rooms, public buses, grocery store aisles when her younger brother used to spiral into sensory overload. The memory hit her fast. The wrong voices. The wrong pressure. Too many people. Too much noise. She stepped forward instinctively. "Everyone, stop." Her voice wasn't loud, but something about its calm certainty sliced through the panic. No one listened. "You need to leave immediately," a security guard snapped, moving toward her. Mariah ignored him. Her eyes stayed locked on Ethan. He wasn't angry. He wasn't violent. He was drowning. "Turn off the overhead lights," she said again, louder this time. The room hesitated. From the staircase, Cassandra Vale appeared, her face pale but composed, watching the stranger who had just spoken with authority inside her home. "Do it," Cassandra said suddenly. The lights dimmed. Mariah slowly removed her shoes, stepping barefoot across the cold marble floor. Every movement was deliberate, measured, non-threatening. She stopped several feet away from Ethan and lowered herself to sit cross-legged on the floor, her body turned slightly sideways, never making direct eye contact. The room fell silent except for Ethan's ragged breathing. Mariah spoke softly, almost like she was talking to herself. "You're okay? Nobody's touching you now, just breathe." Ethan's screaming continued. But the rhythm shifted slightly. Mariah began tapping her fingers gently against the floor. A slow, steady beat. Tap, tap, tap. It echoed through the room like a heartbeat. "Count with me," she whispered. 10, 9, 8. One of the specialists scoffed quietly, shaking his head. But Cassandra raised her hand, silencing him. Ethan's movement slowed, barely noticeable at first. 7, 6, 5. His breathing hitched. 4, 3. His fingers twitched against the marble floor, matching her rhythm unconsciously. 2, 1. Silence fell over the room like a curtain dropping. Ethan collapsed forward onto his knees, trembling, exhausted. Mariah didn't move. Didn't speak. Didn't reach for him. She simply waited. 30 seconds passed. Then, slowly, hesitantly, Ethan crawled forward and wrapped his small fingers around the edge of her catering apron. The entire room froze. Cassandra's breath caught in her throat, because her son had involuntarily reached for another human being. In almost 3 years. Cassandra stepped forward carefully. "What is your name?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Mariah looked up for the first time. "Mariah Bennett." Cassandra studied her for a long moment, then looked down at Ethan, still gripping her apron tightly. For the first time in years. He looked calm. "Meet me in my office tomorrow morning," Cassandra said quietly. Mariah blinked, confused. I just work catering." Cassandra's expression hardened into something unreadable. "Not anymore." Across the room, unseen by most, Cassandra's business partner and cousin, Victor Vale, watched from the shadows. And the calculating smile slowly forming on his face suggested this moment would cost far more than anyone in that room realized. Mariah barely slept that night. The memory of Ethan clutching her apron replayed in her mind on a loop, tangled with the reality that she had stepped into a world she didn't belong to, a world where one mistake could cost her job, her stability, and possibly the fragile life she was holding together for her daughter, Lila. By sunrise, she stood outside Vale Enterprises Tower, staring up at 60 floors of mirrored glass reflecting a sky she couldn't afford to dream beneath. Inside, Cassandra Vale's office overlooked the entire coastline. The room was immaculate, steel, marble, and silence polished to perfection. Cassandra didn't offer her a seat immediately. "I reviewed your employment history," Cassandra said, standing behind her desk, voice calm but razor-sharp. "Catering, hospitality, 2 years as a pediatric hospital assistant before leaving abruptly." Mariah shifted slightly. "My brother needed full-time care," she said quietly. Cassandra nodded once, already aware. "And he experienced sensory processing disorder?" "Yes." "You helped him through episodes similar to Ethan's?" Mariah hesitated. "I helped him survive them," she answered honestly. Cassandra finally gestured toward a chair. "Yesterday was the first time Ethan calmed without medication or physical restraint in 18 months. Mariah swallowed. "I didn't do anything special. I just recognized what he was feeling." Cassandra studied her with surgical precision. "I'm offering you a position as Ethan's personal developmental aide. Salary, $200,000 annually. Full medical coverage. Housing assistance. Private schooling for your daughter." Mariah's breath caught. The number alone could erase every unpaid bill, every late rent notice, every silent panic attack she buried behind smiles for Lila. But instinct tightened in her chest. "What's the catch?" she asked carefully. Cassandra's gaze flickered, just slightly. "Consistency. Availability. Ethan requires stability. That means extended hours, travel, flexibility." Mariah thought of Lila waiting after school, swinging her backpack in the hallway because she refused to leave until her mother arrived. "I can't abandon my daughter," Mariah said firmly. Cassandra surprised her. "Bring her." Mariah blinked. Ethan has never connected with peers. Exposure to another child might support developmental growth. "I will arrange tutors and private instruction for both." The offer sounded unreal. Generous beyond logic. Too generous. "Why me?" Mariah asked. Cassandra's expression cracked for a fraction of a second, exhaustion flashing behind power. "Because nothing else has worked," she said quietly. 3 days later, Mariah and Lila stepped into the Vale mansion carrying 2 duffel bags and uncertainty heavy enough to crush hope. Lila stared around wide-eyed. "Mom, do rich people live inside museums?" Mariah laughed softly despite herself. "Just stay close to me, okay?" The first week unfolded like walking through glass. Staff whispered behind polished smiles. Therapists observed Mariah with barely hidden skepticism. Security tracked her movements through silent camera rotations. Victor Vale, Cassandra's cousin and executive partner, visited frequently, asking questions disguised as polite curiosity. "So, you have formal certification in developmental psychology," he asked during one afternoon tea meeting. No, Mariah answered calmly. Behavioral therapy training. No. Victor smiled thinly. Interesting hiring decision, Cassandra. But none of that mattered when Ethan and Lila entered the sensory room together. At first, they ignored each other completely. Ethan lined toy blocks in rigid color sequences. Lila sat cross-legged across the room sketching quietly in a notebook she carried everywhere. Minutes passed in silence. Then Ethan noticed the rhythm of her pencil scratching paper. He stopped stacking. Watched. Lila didn't look up, sensing his attention but not forcing interaction. Slowly, Ethan crawled closer. Mariah and Cassandra watched through the observation glass, breath suspended between fear and fragile hope. Lila tore a page from her notebook, a simple drawing of two stick figures sitting under a tree, and placed it gently on the floor between them. Ethan stared at the drawing for nearly a full minute. Then, he placed one of his perfectly aligned blocks beside it. Cassandra's hand trembled against the glass. That's the first time he's shared an object voluntarily, she whispered. Mariah smiled faintly. They're speaking their own language. But across the hall, Victor watched through a separate security monitor, his expression darkening as possibility turned into threat. Because Ethan's recovery meant Cassandra remained strong. And Cassandra strong meant Victor would never inherit control of Vale Enterprises. That night, Victor made a quiet phone call. To someone who had already been looking for a reason to challenge Mariah's presence. The mansion felt hollow without Mariah's presence. Within 48 hours of her departure, Ethan regressed further than Cassandra had ever witnessed. He refused food, refused therapy, and spent entire days curled in the far corner of the sensory room, clutching the crumpled drawing Lila had given him. Doctors recommended medication adjustments. Behavioral specialists returned with stricter intervention plans. Cassandra approved none of them. She stood outside the sensory room late one evening, watching her son rock back and forth in silence, and for the first time, she allowed herself to admit the truth she had spent years avoiding. She had built an empire mastering control. But she had never learned how to understand her own child. Meanwhile, Mariah sat inside her small apartment, surrounded by unpacked bags, legal notices spread across her kitchen table like warnings she couldn't escape. Lila sat beside her quietly, drawing the mansion garden from memory, sketching Ethan's small figure sitting beside the fountain. Do you think he's okay? Lila asked softly. Mariah hesitated. I think he misses you, she said. The custody hearing approached quickly, Terrence's legal team armed with fabricated concerns and carefully edited media coverage portraying Mariah as reckless and unqualified. But Cassandra had been working in silence. 3 sleepless nights tracing financial records, phone logs, and internal security archives uncovered everything. Victor's secret communication with Terrence. Payments routed through shell accounts. Metadata proving he orchestrated both the custody filing and the media leak. The betrayal hit deeper than corporate sabotage. Victor hadn't just targeted Cassandra's company. He had targeted her son. The emergency board meeting convened before sunrise. Executives gathered expecting Cassandra to announce leadership transition under shareholder pressure. Instead, she walked in carrying a folder thick enough to silence every whisper in the room. She presented evidence with surgical calm. Each document dismantled Victor's credibility piece by piece. Each timestamp exposed manipulation stretching back nearly a year. Victor's confidence fractured visibly as board members read transcripts linking him to Terrence's legal strategy. You endangered my child, Cassandra said, her voice dangerously quiet. And you destroyed 2 families to gain power you never earned. The vote to remove Victor passed unanimously within minutes. Security escorted him out before he could speak again. Hours later, Cassandra appeared in family court personally, presenting the same evidence during Mariah's custody hearing. The judge reviewed the documentation in stunned silence before dismissing Terrence's claims entirely, citing malicious coordination and fraudulent representation. Mariah barely processed the ruling. She only understood one thing. Lila wasn't being taken from her. But as relief settled, Cassandra approached her outside the courtroom. I don't expect forgiveness, she said carefully. But Ethan hasn't spoken since you left. And I don't know how to reach him without you. Mariah looked at Lila, then back at Cassandra. Some wounds weren't about pride. They were about children waiting in silence for adults to choose them. And that night, Mariah made a decision that would change all their lives again. 2 weeks later, Cassandra Vale resigned as CEO of Vale Enterprises. The announcement shocked financial markets. Analysts speculated about scandal, burnout, corporate restructuring. None of them understood the real reason. For the first time in her life, Cassandra chose presence over power. She stepped into Mariah's apartment building one quiet afternoon, dressed simply, without assistants, security teams, or media awareness. Ethan stood beside her, clutching the same folded drawing. When Lila opened the door, his shoulders relaxed instantly. Neither child spoke. They simply sat on the living room floor beside each other, exchanging crayons and blocks like they had never been separated at all. Mariah and Cassandra watched from across the room, silence carrying more meaning than conversation ever could. "I spent 20 years building something I thought defined me," Cassandra admitted quietly. "But I never built the one relationship that mattered most." Mariah leaned against the wall. "You didn't fail him," she said gently. "You just tried to fix him before you learned to see him." Over the following months, routines formed naturally. Mariah worked with Ethan part-time while raising Lila independently. Cassandra reduced corporate obligations, dedicating her time to learning sensory support techniques, attending parent workshops anonymously, and sitting beside Ethan during therapy sessions rather than observing behind glass. Progress wasn't dramatic. It was slow, messy, real. One autumn afternoon, the four of them visited a quiet lakeside park outside the city. Leaves drifted across the water while Ethan and Lila sat at the shoreline stacking smooth stones into uneven towers. Cassandra sat beside Mariah on a wooden bench. "I'm still terrified I'll make another mistake," she admitted. Mariah smiled softly. "You will," she said honestly. "That's how parenting works." Cassandra laughed for the first time without restraint. Across the shore, Ethan placed the final stone carefully on top of Lila's tower. It wobbled dangerously before settling into balance. Then, he spoke. "Stay." The single word froze both women in place. Lila grinned. "I'm not going anywhere." Cassandra pressed her hand against her mouth as tears blurred her vision. The moment wasn't grand or cinematic. It was small, fragile, perfect. As the sun lowered behind the trees, the two children laughed quietly, their towers collapsing into ripples across the lake's surface. Mariah watched them, understanding something deeper than success or survival. Sometimes healing doesn't arrive through experts, wealth, or control. Sometimes it arrives through patience. Through listening. Through people brave enough to stay when leaving would be easier. And as Ethan reached for Cassandra's hand while Lila reached for Mariah's, two broken families stood together, not fixed, but finally whole enough to keep moving forward.